Welcome to Extension Connection on Super Talk 1270. Thoughtful information and discussion with experts from both Burleigh and Morton County Extension Service offices. Extension Connection provides advice on family nutrition, issues in agriculture, lawn and garden, community leadership, homeowner concerns, and so much more. Live from the Super Talk 1270 studio, this is Extension Connection.
Good morning. This is Burleigh County Extension here at the Super Talk 1270 station. This is Amelia Dahl, the 4-H Youth Development Agent, and I'm joined by Chandra.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, we just had a malfunction here with Amelia's microphone.
My microphone decided
Forgive us, that was funny.
It didn't want to work this morning.
Yeah, it's great to be back here. I was out of town for the last week, and good to be on the radio. So we're going to talk about
I'm going to talk about bullying, and you're going to talk about...
They're back is what it's called. So adult kids moving back home. Sometimes it's necessary, but how to facilitate that?
I was one of those kids. I moved in my in-laws' house.
Oh, wow, really? Okay.
Yes, for 3 months.
That's a different dynamic, which I wasn't prepared to reference.
It was good.
Okay.
It was different. But
okay.
The first thing we're going to talk about is bullying. School has started again, and with school comes an increase in bullying. Bullying happens year-round, especially with the advent of social media, and social media can bring us a lot of wonderful things, but it can also bring us a lot of bad things.
Sure.
And teens are notorious for using social media to kind of hide behind when they're bullying. So I just have 5 practical ways for teens to confront bullying daily. Even as adults, we face bullying, but as kids, especially in that middle school, high school, bullying is very prevalent. When we think about bullying in elementary, we think about pulling each other's hair, pushing each other, not letting you play with each other. But when we get into high school, it's a lot more intense. They focus a lot on the mental bullying rather than the physical bullying because it's harder to track.
Right.
So the first practical way for teens to confront bullying is to not be a follower. And this is really hard for teenagers because as a teenager, your number one concern is usually fitting in.
Sure.
And if the cool kid on the block is being a bully and making fun of the kid sitting next to you in math class, it's very easy to jump on that bandwagon and do the same thing. But if you become a bigger person and don't fall into that, it's a great way to kind of get out of that cycle. When I think of this, I always think of when I was growing up in our cafeteria in our elementary, and I still remember the sign. It said, stand for what you believe, even if you're standing alone. Or stand for what's right, even if you're standing alone. So even if you're the only one who's not bullying, you're still standing for what is right. And going off of that, start being that person for that bully. I think I've told you, Chandra, several times that when I was growing up, I was very bullied.
Yeah.
And even if you just have that one friend who is there for you to help you and be like, it's okay, we'll get through this, it means the world to that person. Even if they don't always talk to each other, but a look across the hall that says, I got your back, means a lot, especially to a teenager. With social media, don't share, like, or comment posts that are mean. And this seems pretty common, but it's really easy when you're scrolling through Facebook to hit like and then not even fully comprehend what you're liking. Many times bullies engage in cyberbullying, slut-shaming, or name-calling online, again, because they can hide behind that computer. There's several news stories of girls creating fake online accounts so that they can use them to make fun of other girls and so that they can't be traced back to them immediately. And this just creates an even worse dynamic when they get into that school setting. But there is good things that can come from social media. There's a kindness movement where it's from the Mean Stinks campaign. So they encourage kids to share tweets about comments, quotes, or advice for others to see and then tag it nice advice. And then kids start to realize the power they have to influence the culture within their school. I've noticed that schools or classes that have more girls than boys tend to be higher in bullying.
rates.
So
Okay.
when you were growing up, did your class have more girls or more boys?
You know, it was just about, I think it was 51-49
Oh,
boys.
wow.
I mean, it was literally half and half, but I remember bullying specifically in 8th grade. Once we got into high school, I don't recall it. You know, it was a different high school, and I went to high school in Wyoming, but that 8th grade mark, and I can totally relate to, I think one of my girlfriends was being bullied, and she would miss a lot of school. That's another, isn't it a sign for
That's a
parents to
sign.
watch
Yep.
for? And, you know, I would stand by her when it was happening and things of that nature. So it was to this day, I think about that. And she did end up getting pregnant when she was a senior in high school. So there were things that affected her significantly.
Right. It psychologically,
Yeah.
bullying messes with you for the rest of your life.
Sure.
It impacts what you do for the entirety of your life.
I can see that. Mhm.
But with kids being the hashtag nice advice,
Okay.
kids start to realize that they can be part of a culture of cruelty, or they can start their own movement.
That's
so
great.
Helping kids come up with how they can do that is how parents kind of play into this. And like you
Right.
mentioned, Chandra, if your kid is used to never miss school,
Right.
and then all of a sudden is saying they don't want to go to
They don't
school
wanna go to
today,
school.
or
Acting sick.
they're
or
acting
something?
sick,
Yeah.
but they're not really sick. Those are definite signs of bullying. If your kid used to love school, and I'm going to use the term nerd, and I use that lovingly because
Me too.
I am a nerd.
Yeah. Well, not yet that, but I love the term.
That they're very book smart. They love school, and that is prime target. Those are prime targets for bullies.
It's so
Because
unfortunate.
people who know what's going on are excelling well in class, it's easier for bullies to pick them out and pick on them rather than change their own behavior and do their homework. So watch out for that with your kids. Next step or suggestion is holding friends accountable. So in your circle of friends, if you notice that one of your friends is starting to be a bully, hopefully your kid is good enough friends with them to pull them inside and be like, hey, look, you need to knock that off. That's not cool. And that goes back to that other one. Don't play into it. Don't be a follower. Just because Susie is bullying Jimmy doesn't mean that you have to too. And that, again, is really hard because as teens in that middle school, high school age, acceptance is so important. It helps shape our outlook on life, our dependence on our friends, all of that. So if we aren't focused on bullying people, it's hard to kind of pave your own way.
Right.
The last one is live a life of empathy. And this is a hard thing to teach kids.
It is.
Empathy is something that can't be really taught. It's something that has to be shown. So the whole walk a mile in somebody else's shoes really plays into effect here. So we need to keep that in mind as we move forward, show our kids empathy so they know what it looks like so they can show it to their peers.
Right. You know, actually, I have to interject here. My husband thinks that empathy should be a subject in school, just like science and math is. And, you know, we talk about psychology, and it's a requirement typically in the college level. But wouldn't that be interesting if empathy was required? I mean, sure, we could come up with ways to at least, you know, facilitate the teaching of it. You really have to absorb it internally. And I'm getting better in my adulthood about it.
Yep.
You know, I'm a little bit more direct, and you know that about me. And this is an effort that I really want to undertake. I feel like what you're saying here, you almost need to personalize, and I would say everybody has a responsibility to interject if it's happening.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
So we are going to take a quick break here, and then we'll be back after the break with some more tips about dealing with bullying. All right, welcome back to the Extension Connection. This is Burleigh County. I'm Amelia Dahl, 4-H Youth Development Agent over in Burleigh, and I'm joined today by Chandra Zeman-Belinsky, our Family Consumer Science Agent.
Good morning.
We were just talking a little before the break about how to work with your teens to confront bullying, and right before we went, our last tip was live a life of empathy, and Chandra was kind of sharing how her husband feels that should be a subject in school.
It's an idea, isn't it?
It is, because like we were saying, empathy is something hard to teach.
Yeah.
You really learn it by doing it.
Right.
And there's so many different personalities, and empathy means something very different to everybody. So working with your kid on showing empathy towards them, and this can be something that I encourage you to do even with small kids.
Okay.
The younger you start, the better off they're going to be.
Yeah.
So even like my 4-year-old, teaching him empathy, and it seems a little ridiculous because he's 4.
He's 4 already?
Yeah, he turned 4 in September.
Okay.
We're not going to talk about the fact that Owen will be 2 next month.
Okay.
But showing them empathy, I understand what you're going through. I understand you don't want to go to bed right now. Why don't you tell me why? Not only are you showing them, hey, I get you, I got your back, but you're also saying, tell me your reasons. And my mom was visiting a few months ago, and my son wanted to do something, and I told him he had explained to me why he wanted to do it, not just because I want to. And she goes, Amelia, you're really setting the table for a horrible teenage year. He is going to argue with everything. I'm like, well, at least he'll have valid points. Maybe I'm raising a lawyer. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
So that's how parents can work with their kids to prevent bullying.
Yeah.
I also have 10 tips for schools to help schools prevent bullying. So if you're on the PTA, if you have an influence at your school, these are great things to do. And then also be mindful if your kid's school is doing them. So the first one is make bullying prevention a priority from the first day of school. So don't wait until it's an issue. And the same thing applies with your kids. Don't wait until you get a note sent home from their teacher that says, so-and-so is bullying today. Make it a clear-cut rule that in your house, bullying is not accepted. And if that happens, there are consequences. Same with a school. From day one, bullying is not accepted. Step 2, establish intervention programs for socially vulnerable students. So we talked about, those kids that are labeled nerds, maybe new kids. New kids are also seen as outcasts.
Yeah,
and I know,
targets.
Chandra, you moved a lot growing up. Did you ever see any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I did. But, it's interesting because it totally depends on the mindset. My dad grew up in rural Hazen, Mercer County there, and he said, it's not so bad being a new kid, talking to me as a teenager, being the new kid in a totally different place. And he said, the new kids were cool and intriguing in my school. So it could be the opposite, but make sure that you watch for the signs, I think.
Right. So if you are moving or relocating, even if they're just switching schools in town, watch out for those signs of bullying.
Right. It definitely can be.
Goal 3, empower the school's bystanders. So this goes back to with your kids, helping them understand just because your friend's doing it doesn't mean you have to. In the school setting, how can we help empower them so that they're more than just bystanders, that they're kind of that backup.
The empowerment, and that's what we can do as adults. Yep.
Number 4, create discipline procedures and consequences for bullies. This is one that my school drastically lacked growing up. When I got bullied, I went to the principal's office, and I was told, well, kids will be kids. And there is a certain amount of truth to that. I mean, yes, kids will be kids, but when you're getting locked into lockers, your homework's getting ripped up, you're getting tripped in the hallway, that's not kids being kids. That's kids being bullies, and it needs to be understood that that's not acceptable. Number 5, replace the school's bystanders with an upstander community. So this goes back to working with those bystanders, empowering them. Creating a bystander community involves taking the middle 70% of students who often witness the bullying and developing a group of responders. So foster relationships in those students that will encourage them to do something about the bullying rather than just standing by.
So it's called upstanding.
Upstanding. Yeah, being an upstander rather than a bystander.
And I have to tell you, that I'm in the military, and that's how we suggest to handle potential sexual assault and, rape situations where we think it might happen, especially think late night and somebody's been out at a party or something and having fun and they look like they should not be continuing that and going home. And so that's the whole concept is upstanding. So it could apply to other situations. Right. It's great.
The next one is ensure that teachers and administrators are committing to taking a stand on bullying. Now, I went to a very small rural school, and in those small towns, a lot of times your last name matters. So the last name you have determines your status in those towns. So making sure that the teachers are above that. And again, bullying transfers to adults.
You bet.
So as a teacher, as an administrator in those schools, you need to make sure that whatever beef you may have with somebody's last name, a whole Hatfields and McCoys kind of thing, doesn't transfer into the school because the kids pick up on that.
Yeah, right.
Look for opportunities to role play, perform skits, or incorporate anti-bullying messages into the curriculum. And this can also go back to helping kids learn empathy.
Yeah.
There's one way to teach it, that hands-on skits, role play. Kids love to do skits. I don't know if you've worked with a lot of kids. They love to do that because it's hands-on and they get up, they get moving, and they get to use their creativity.
Okay.
With all of the standardized testing we have, creativity is kind of slashed.
Right.
Role playing and skits let them get that out.
Okay.
Ensure that the staff behavior matches core school values. So this goes back to that last one. Make sure that everybody's on the same page. Develop partnerships with parents. So as parents, it's important to have those partnerships with your teacher. This goes back to don't think the teacher is the enemy.
Okay.
In today's society, a lot of times people think, well, my kid is doing bad in math. It must be the teacher. They don't look at their kid.
Right.
So understand that you and your parent and the teacher are a team. They are both contributing to the well-being of your child and how well they succeed in school. So working as a team, you're going to get farther.
I know quite a few educators that are retired, and they say that has been the swing from the beginning of their time and think 40 years ago now to now, the parents are working against the teachers consistently. So that is a great point.
Yeah. Work with the teacher, and yes, there are some bad teachers, but you know what?
Sure.
My mom is an educator, and I have been around a lot of teachers. The bad ones, quote unquote, are definitely the minority.
Okay.
Teachers.
So would your mom say the same thing? It's different now than it was when. Sure.
Definitely.
Okay.
She teaches family consumer sciences.
Yeah.
And she had somebody who did very poorly on a project, and the mom came in and couldn't believe that my mom wouldn't change the grade.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yep. So work with your teacher, not against them.
Okay.
And then the last one, challenge students to rise to new levels of behavior. So we do a character counts model in 4-H and with extension. So modeling quality character, modeling good behavior, and challenging those students to rise above that. We do something at camp where if somebody is exhibiting one of the 6 pillars of character, they get an extra bead for their name tag.
Okay.
So if somebody's being generous or compassionate, they get the bead for that activity. So the kids compete to get those beads.
So a reward system, a healthier,
So those are just some ways to work with bullying in schools. Obviously, every bullying situation is unique, but we really need to work as a team to combat bullying, because if the bullying is happening in the schools, it's also happening outside the schools. And as parents, we don't always see the stuff that's happening on social media. So we really need to keep that all in perspective and help our kids get through that. So we are going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk about adult kids moving back home. All right. Thank you. Welcome back to the Extension Connection. This is Burleigh County. This is Amelia Dahl, 4-H Youth Development Agent from Burleigh County, and I'm joined today by Chandra Zeman-Belinsky, our Family Consumer Science Agent. And before the break, we were talking about bullying and how to work with your kids' school as well as your kids on being an empathetic upstander. Yes, so that would kind of sum up
That's right.
the bullying in their schools to prevent that. And so now we're going to kind of switch subjects, and we're going to talk about adult kids moving back home.
This could also be called boomerang kids, if you think about it. And, I think that most of us can relate to this at one point or another, whether it's you having to move home for a period of time or your kids having done it, even your grandkids. And we're talking people that are 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old.
Really?
The example that I heard here last week when I was out in West Virginia with family and consumer science agents across the nation, so many different schools. This actually is a program that comes to us from Cornell Extension, Cooperative Extension, and they were saying that a 6-year-old man moved in with his 83-year-old mom, and he thought that he was going to take care of her. And she said, I don't want help right now. She wasn't ready to
back off.
Yeah. So it can be many different dynamics. And we want to tell you today how to facilitate a good relationship with your adult kids, because the key word is that they're adults now. And so it's hard to mentor them versus manage them like you were used to doing. And those are the two M words that we use, like you're used to doing, in the years past. But remember that they're adults now. So starting out with a statistic, it says, according to a recent U.S. Census report, and this is something that comes out of the University of Georgia, more than 25% of Americans ages 18 to 34 are living with their parents. So that 18 to 34 is about that millennial age, and it just happens to be, this is the demographic we're talking about this time, but as I said a minute ago, it can be any age. We're talking 1 out of every 4. That's significant. So let's talk about, how to manage the situation. Amelia said earlier that she was one of them that moved in with her in-laws. That's a whole different dynamic.
Yeah. Well, we lived in Fargo, and then my husband got a job in Bismarck, and that was during the big housing boom.
Yes.
And we didn't want to rent because we didn't want to be in an apartment for a year, and we wanted to save our money for a house. So we actually moved out to Elmont and lived with my in-laws, and we lived there for 3 months.
Okay.
And I will admit, at the beginning, I was really apprehensive about it, but my in-laws handled it very well.
Really?
Yeah, we had what we call apartment A. It's still called, that room is still called apartment A, and that was our space. And we had a 6-month-old son at the time.
Right.
And so we set up our bed, we had our dresser. That was our place.
Huh.
And
Interesting.
So they did a very good job.
Did you call it Apartment A? Did you name this? I could totally see you naming Apartment
A. And we got him a doorbell for Christmas the year after we moved out.
Right.
So that they could put it on Apartment A.
Actually, you'll always have that memory.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I've actually been known let's get into it. Why would your kids move home? That's the first fundamental to understand it. And so one of them could be your situation. Like you say, the housing market's different. You're moving in because of a job. It could be the opposite. No job, no money. Okay, some other reasons that would apply to me. As I said earlier in the segment, I'm in the military, and after deployment, I came home for a few months. And it ended up being probably just under what I thought it would be. I stayed at home for about 5 months, and I was thinking it would be just about 6. And I decided I wanted to buy a house, and it was a good time to do it because that's when the government subsidized first-time home buyers with $8,000. So it was a good time for me. But, I needed that transition, comfort zone, and my parents were willing to do that. One thing that we need to remember here, especially with the millennials, is that we talk about where your life stages are. And so research was just in front of me last week where your parents, so think baby boomers. Okay, so baby boomers, we define that. My dad just asked me that yesterday. What are you talking about? Yeah, it's the 51-year-olds to the 70-year-olds, just about that line here. And that's, not a fine line. That's dynamic. It could be 50, it could be 71. Okay, so right around there, two decades. Though their life stage was at about 21 years of age, they were doing the same thing that today's 29-year-old is doing.
Right.
So life stage. So in other words, they were having kids earlier, as an example, or getting married earlier. And I think back, and that's pretty well the case with most of the people in my family that I can relate to.
Yep.
And I got married, much later, even later than 29. And so life stage. So when your parents say, well, when I was your age, I was doing this, you can't really do that in a direct linear fashion.
Right.
Okay, so back to why, there could be mental illness that isn't diagnosed, even Asperger's, which is not necessarily mental illness, but something that isn't diagnosed, immaturity, late bloomer, alcohol and drug abuse, so that they're preventing a relapse. Any of these things, just as long as you understand the why, it's a good start so that you can make a plan. Okay? So what happens is issues, we want you to learn from the issues that we've seen in our research with extension across the country. So issues that we've seen, just trust in general, whether or not you think, especially with the drug and alcohol relapse prevention, you have to establish a certain level of trust. Okay, you're extending a hand that you can stay here. Make sure that you're not constantly walking behind them to make sure that, they're not relapsing or something of that nature. Hey, extend a hand of trust if you're going to allow the situation to occur in the first place. We've heard issues, they're taking over the house, there's no time to contribute or money to contribute. So time versus money. Okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit, meaning how are you going to contribute? That's right. Important, whether it's monetary or not. So that's a plan that you'll have to set up and some goals together. And, some people have said their young adults seem too comfortable at home. Maybe you're facilitating that comfort. Okay, so start self-reflecting that a little bit and what's in it for the adults. Okay, so as we talk about why kids might move home and maybe even the issues that you're seeing as they do, understand it, as we've mentioned, and plan some goals together. Okay, so some goals could be I do agree that, and I've seen this myself a couple times with friends, that you have to set up whether or not you expect the person moving in, the adult child moving in, to mow the lawn or to take out the garbage. This should be discussed up front rather than making them feel badly that they're not contributing.
Right.
You've not helped them in contributing. Okay, so if there's an expectation, if you expect them to do the dishes, everybody's dishes, their dishes, what have you, this should be actually part of the plan. You're not nitpicking.
Right, and I think that is probably one of the tougher conversations you'll have.
Probably.
Because when we moved out to the farm, I said, do we have to pay rent? What's the expectation?
So you did ask. Good for you to drive that.
Yeah, and it was just, we picked up groceries when we were in town because Zach and I both worked in Bismarck. So if needed, we would pick up a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread or anything like that.
Right.
And then if we were home before them, there was just the expectation that we would get supper going.
Okay.
And so it's a tough conversation, especially for me having with my in-laws.
Right. And the spouse's family.
But it's also a good conversation to have with your parents if you're moving in with them, and don't just assume. Because
that's right.
As a millennial, we are really good at doing that.
Mm-hmm. So, actually here, you're right. And actually, I love some of the information they gave about millennials at this, so we'll have to talk about that in the next segment. We're also going to provide you some tasks that you could talk about. Like you said, whether it's dinner, groceries, I'll go through a nice list to help keep you on track after the break.
All right, we'll be back. Welcome back to the Extension Connection with Burleigh County. This is Amelia Dahl, 4-H Youth Development Agent, and I'm joined by Chandra Zeman-Bolinsky, our Family Consumer Science Agent. Before the break, we were talking about how to kind of facilitate adult children moving back in. And so you were talking about some tasks that we could talk about.
Yeah. So, Amelia, thank you so much for hosting, by the way, today. You did a really good job. Amelia was talking about bullying, especially as it pertains to school-age kids, teenagers, and, a little bit about the social media that is an avenue for bullying, too. And then we're moving into, as the kids age, they become adults that could potentially at some point need to move back home. That could also the program is called They're Back. You could also call it Boomerang Kids. There's a book out there called Boomerang Kids. And, we talked a little bit about make sure that you have a plan and a couple things to recognize to extend trust. The big thing is to have some conversations that might be uncomfortable. Here are some tasks that are your regular day-to-day tasks that could cause stress, actually. And you want to talk about who's in charge of what. So if you're not going to charge your kids for being at home, I know my grandparents did this for one of their kids, so my uncle, and they charged him, but unbeknownst to him, so later on he found out that they put the money aside to help him get things for his new house. Okay, so that's nice. An option. Yeah, it actually is. And my grandma was just talking about that yesterday when I told her what we're going to talk about on the radio. But here's some tasks that you should talk about. Food related, Amelia used the example. Sometimes we'd do some shopping, pick some things up, preparing meals. That was an expectation, whoever was home first. So great examples. House cleaning, I think, is a big one. Who's going to vacuum, scrub the floor, clean the bathrooms, because everybody's using those areas. Right. Home maintenance like shoveling, lawn care, garbage removal, who's taking out the garbage, laundry, whether or not it's so-and-so's day on Tuesday and make sure that everything's out of the dryer, what have you. Car related, it might seem like we're making a list that just goes on, but these are all things that are part of daily life or at least weekly life.
Well, and if you think about it, if these were all things that you talked about when your child lived at home as a teenager, as they were growing up.
Right.
And that made life function semi-normally.
Right.
So if you want to have a semi-normally function life, still think it's no different than having a roommate.
Right.
When I was an RA, we had to have all of our residents do roommate contracts. And they always thought it was so silly until about the second month when the honeymoon phase is worn off. And they realized that they really didn't like that their roommate wore their shoes in their room. So having those conversations, essentially making a roommate contract with your kids.
Yes, and actually that is very interesting to think about, the shoes thing. Little things that you probably, honeymoon phase, great reference. And, now that you're talking about that, it really isn't any different than, how you would want to raise them as teenagers. So this is a good segue into how to talk to your adult kids. Okay, so I'm looking at a sheet in front of me, and, it's a neat play on words, but we say, you want to mentor your kids versus manage them, okay? Especially because they're adults. So you don't want to talk to an adult as if they're a child, and vice versa. The child will, turn around and give you attitude, and then you cower as the parent, or however you handle that. You tower over either way.
Right. If you treat them as children. They're going to come back with you with the attitude of a 17-year-old.
That's exactly right.
And attitude of a 17-year-old is a force to be reckoned with.
And you're not going to get very far.
Right.
So here's a couple examples on the mentor column. So you want to consult alongside and collaborate versus, like we said, dominate and, being authoritarian. Okay. Mutual respect or more equity is how you want to talk to them versus dictating terms of living. You both have to come to the table. And I can tell you some of the research that I was just looking at about millennials versus baby boomers and even Generation X in between. Those baby boomers do want to be consulted. And sometimes the baby boomers feel like they know more, and maybe they do through life experience, but the millennials have a lot of good to say.
Well, and it's a different kind of knowledge.
It's
baby
a different kind of knowledge.
Had a very different life growing up than the millennials. And so they do know a lot, but so do millennials. And I think a lot of times older generations forget what it was like to be the younger generation.
Yeah, I remember being a teenager one time, and I was going through my thing or whatever, and my dad said, when I was your age, I used to think that I was going to be a Hollywood movie star. And it was interesting that he said that, and finally he got some credibility with me, because everybody thinks that they're going to move to Hollywood at some point, and that was what I was experiencing at that time. So it was actually good. So go ahead and tell your kids what you used to think when they were their age. Just don't say when I was your age. We had talked about how life is stages are different ages now.
And be mindful of when and how you're sharing it.
That's true.
Don't share it in the heat of the moment when you're trying to prove a point about something they did wrong. Share it in a lighthearted conversation, maybe when you're sitting down to a shared meal that they cooked.
Right. So, the mentor versus the manage. As a mentor, you would say privacy is okay. And as a manager, you would say, I need to jump in and see what you're doing. So make sure that you respect their privacy. Let's do one more here. Listen versus lecture. I think that's a good one.
Yep.
Okay, so moving on to a couple of resources that I could give you here. There's one particular book. We aren't endorsing any books in general. I did talk about there's a book called Boomerang Kids, but this one book here is used by Cornell, and it's called Under One Roof Again. And I think it's about $15 to buy. And the novelty of this book, and I'm going to pick it up myself, it's written by both the parents and the adult children. So it has both perspectives, and they have some activities that you can do together. So, like you said, get them up and do some skits. Who knows if they're going to be,
I don't know if you'll get a 27-year-old to get up and do
I don't know.
skit,
That might be different. But I'm curious what the activities are, so I should pick that book up. So that's an option. Go ahead and give us a call if you need some more options at 221-6865. That's the Burley County Extension Office. So we talked a little bit just now about how to communicate with our kids. The important thing is mentor versus manage, listen versus lecture. A couple reasons why we're seeing the adult kids come back in. I want to elaborate a little bit here on some new information. The average student loan debt. And we should look into what that is, but it's
high.
It's just about $30,000 and that could even be low.
That's low.
Right.
We were just having this discussion last week in our office.
Okay.
And you were at conference, but we were talking about how it's so expensive to go to school nowadays. Yeah. Like, I came into school with a lot of scholarships, and I still have student loans that I'm paying off. And I know a lot of kids, when we went on our 4-H ambassador college tour, looking at, wow, it costs a lot to live in the residence halls. Maybe mom and dad's house isn't so bad.
Right. And that's exactly right. I joined the military originally to get money for school, and then I ended up loving it. But, that's exactly. I mean, I still have student loans too, even though I got some money there. Just know that, excuse me, divorce could be a concern, and it is a concern, but especially having your kids move back in with their kids potentially. Interesting statistic, when children get married between the ages of 20 to 25, there's a 60% divorce rate today. And when they get married later, so after 25, there's a 50% divorce rate. Just know that statistic if you're trying to mentor your children. I do want to make sure that you talk about the expenses on top of the tasks. And the last thing is evaluate yourself as the parent on whether or not you're making it easy for your kids to move back in. Maybe you don't know your spouse without kids. You need to go into uncharted territory where you're alone without the children, and that's uncomfortable for you. But empower your children to move out and be independent when it's right for them. So, Amelia, you have something about
Yes, we have some 4-H project days that are coming up that are open to all kids. No requirement to be in 4-H, no requirement to live in Burley County. I encourage people to go to our Burley County website and check them out. We have one coming up in a few weeks for kids ages 5 and older. They're going to make a Christmas ornament, and our high school kids are teaching this one.
Good one.
And then the beginning of December, we have a holiday treat platter that we're making. So each group of kids will make something, and then they'll all go home with a holiday platter. We have lots of other ones planned, but we are to the end of our show. So I encourage you to go to the Burley County Extension website. Check those out. You can register online or give our office a call at 221-6865.
Yeah. You don't have to be a 4-H'er, right?
No. You can, no requirement to be a 4-H.
Anybody
live in Burley
can call
County,
us.
Nothing. We just love to have you. Have a great day, everybody.
You've been listening to Extension Connection on Super Talk 1270. News and information from NDSU Extension Service and representatives of Morton and Burley County Extension offices. Tell your friends to listen in for the next Extension Connection, exclusively here on Super Talk 1270.